Evening, everybody. I do work in the financial aid office at Anne Arundel Community College, and tonight I'm just going to be giving you some basic information about financial aid. Basically, what financial aid is, what types of financial aid there are available, how you apply for them, and how you actually keep them once you have them. So, if at any point you do have any questions, definitely put those in the chat. We will answer all the questions that we can, and I will also give my contact information as well in case somebody does think of a question after tonight. They can definitely contact me and ask me that question. That is totally fine. Go ahead and put this in here. Okay. Okay. So this information, while I am from Anne Arundel Community College, this information can be used at any college in the country because it is just general financial aid information. So even if a student is not planning to attend AACC, that's totally fine. Take this information to that school so that they can apply for financial aid there. Okay. As far as financial aid, there are going to be four main elements of financial aid. The first one in the top left-hand corner is satisfactory academic progress, or SAP, as it's often referred to. And I'll get into a little bit more detail on that one in just a second, but that one will play more into a student actually keeping their eligibility for financial aid once they have it. The next one in the top right-hand corner is going to be federal aid. So that is any kind of financial aid that comes directly from the federal government. Bottom left is going to be state aid. That is financial aid that comes from the state government wherever that student is actually attending classes. And then the last one down there at the bottom right is going to be scholarships. And there are different types of scholarships, and those different types will have different applications and different application processes, which we'll go into a little bit. Okay, first one is satisfactory academic progress. Because a majority of financial aid comes from either the federal government or the state government, they do require that schools monitor students' academic progress to make sure that they're meeting the criteria to actually financial aid. And that criteria that they will have to meet in order to keep that is going to be maintaining a 2.0 GPA and an overall 67% completion rate, which basically means they need to avoid excessive withdrawing from classes or excessive failing grades in classes, because these are going to be the two things that have the biggest impact on their completion rates. If they don't meet these levels, it will depend typically on the school as to what their process is, but many schools will either place them on a financial aid probationary period if they're close to those levels, or they might place them under financial aid suspension if they've already gone below those levels, and usually they'll let them know. And in that case, the student may have to do an appeal to actually explain what the issue was with the class that they had or something like that, so that they can hopefully get their financial aid status reinstated. I would say general rule, when a student is looking to drop or withdraw from a class, or they know they're not doing well in a class, I would highly suggest that they go to their school's financial aid office before they do anything with that class. So that way we can take a look where they're currently with their status. We can take a look and see what potential issues this might cause as far as their financial aid eligibility. And we can take a look at that and kind of better prepare them for what might come of it. If they come to us after they've already withdrawn from the class or something like that, there's not much we can do as far as the preemptive part of it, but we can definitely help them through completing the appeals if it applies to them, and hopefully getting their financial aid eligibility reinstated. Okay. So second element is going to be federal financial aid. Like I said, this is aid that comes directly from the federal government by filling out a FAFSA, which I will go into more detail in just a second. But in order for a student to actually be eligible to receive any kind of federal financial aid, they do have to be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident slash eligible non-citizen, which this is determined by the FAFSA itself. Also, they do have to be a high school graduate or a GED holder. And they do have to have a valid social security number if that's applicable to their situation. And it will also ask if certain individuals are required. Typically, it is male students over the age of 18 are required to register for selective service in order to receive federal financial aid. They will ask this question on the FAFSA itself. If the student hasn't registered, they can use the information on the FAFSA to go ahead and register for that while they're doing their FAFSA application. When a student actually applies for financial aid, in order for them to fully receive the funds for financial aid, they will have to be in an eligible degree or certificate program at their institution. Every college, for one reason or another, has a group of degrees and certificates that are not eligible to receive federal financial aid. So the student would want to make sure that the program that they're looking at taking is eligible to receive those funds, because we don't want them to start the classes and realize too late that those classes are not going to be able to be paid for by their federal aid. Okay. One thing particularly about federal financial aid is there are quite a bit of acronyms that they use to determine eligibility, to translate that eligibility and everything like that. And sometimes, especially if a student has never seen these before, it can be rather confusing. So I do like to go over some of them to kind of give them a heads up. So that way, when they see them in the notifications they get from the schools, they're not blindsided. The first one is going to be EFC. That's expected family contribution. Basically, when a student applies for financial aid, they put all the information on the FAFSA, they submit it. They use that information to determine how much the student and their family could feasibly put towards a student's college education based on the information that they have on that FAFSA. And then that information is going to play a key factor in actually determining their financial need. The second one is going to be cost of attendance. That is basically how much it costs to go to whatever school the student is looking to go to. That's usually made up of tuition, fees, room and board, if it's applicable, transportation, a bunch of different things. And how the schools actually determine the amounts that the student is qualified for, they take that cost of attendance, they're going to minus out that EFC, and the remaining amount is going to be their financial need. And that one is going to translate to dollar amounts when it actually gets out to the individual schools that the student designates. Okay, so applying for federal financial aid, you would need to do the FAFSA. It's the free application for federal student aid, and you can do that at fafsa.gov or studentaid.gov. The studentaid.gov website is the overall website for everything involving federal aid, federal applications. But if you do type in fafsa.gov, it'll take you directly to the login pages to actually log into the FAFSA itself. Make sure when you're actually working on the FAFSA that it is a .gov website, because there are FAFSA.coms, there's FAFSA.nets, there's FAFSA.orgs, and they will technically allow a student to do a FAFSA and submit it, but they will charge them to do so. So you should never be asked to pay to submit a FAFSA. If you are, make sure you're on the correct website. Chances are you might be on one of the other ones. Definitely switch over. The new FAFSAs for the upcoming year will usually open up on the FAFSA website on October 1st. This past October 1st, it would have opened up for next academic year, which would be the 2021-2022 academic year. And as far as when you want to submit that, it's going to depend entirely on the school that the student is actually planning to attend, because each school is going to have its own set of deadlines as far as when they expect that FAFSA information to them. So ultimately check in with the school's financial aid office, check what their deadlines are. Some schools might have it sometime in February, or on the other spectrum, at AACC, we accept FAFSAs at any point. We don't have any kind of FAFSA application deadlines or anything like that. So it is a pretty wide range as far as deadlines. When a student fills out a FAFSA, they can submit their FAFSA up to 10 schools at a time. You can add 10 schools on it, send that information out. So if a student is applying to multiple schools, they're not sure where they're looking to attend yet, that's totally fine. Go ahead, have them add all of the schools. Go ahead and submit it. And even if they decide to apply to another school after they've already submitted, they can log back into their FAFSA, add another school, send it out again. It sends out that same information. So multiple schools can have their information at the same time. That's completely fine. They'll go ahead and get them processed. The main thing that they're looking at as far as federal aid is where the students are actually registered for classes and where they receive funds from the federal government. Now, when doing the FAFSA, it is very important that when you actually go through the FAFSA, you fully submit it. Make sure that a confirmation page, which I'll show you what that looks like in just a second, comes up on the screen before you log out or before you exit out of the screen. If this confirmation page doesn't come up, then it's likely that the FAFSA information wasn't fully submitted for whatever reason. So make sure you get this confirmation, and you will get a confirmation email as well. Make sure you get both of those elements to ensure that the FAFSA was actually submitted fully, and then the schools will actually get that information. Okay, so this is what the FAFSA website actually looks like. So make sure that when you actually are doing the FAFSA, this is what you're looking at. It should say Federal Student Aid in the top left-hand corner and have the 2 logins for returning users and new users. Now, if you've never done a FAFSA before, it is going to take you through the new student process, which will ask you to create an FSA ID and password. This is what you would actually use to sign into the FAFSA, submit the information, and that's what you would to digitally sign the FAFSA once you're done with it. Now, if a student is considered a dependent student by the FAFSA, which is in most cases will apply to graduating seniors that are just graduating high school and are entering their freshman year. A lot of times they will be considered dependent, and in that case, the FAFSA is going to ask for their information, but it's also going to ask for the parents' information. And in that instance, the student would need their own FSA ID and password, but the parent would need their own FSA ID and password as well, their own separate logins, because like I said, that is how you're going to digitally sign the FAFSA itself. I would suggest, even if students aren't planning to fill out the FAFSA right now, I would suggest that they go ahead and create their FSA ID and password, and parents as well, because it can take a little bit of time, because they do have to actually confirm the information for the FSA ID. They have to send out confirmations for your phone numbers, for your emails. They have to check social security numbers through the social security database and everything like that. Sometimes it can take a couple of minutes, sometimes a couple of hours. I've seen it take as much as 24 hours to complete the process. So I would say go ahead and complete that part at least, so that way when you go to do the FAFSA, it's not going to hold you up. Just make sure that you write down what your username and password were, so that way you don't have to spend time resetting that information once you get in. Okay, so this is what the confirmation page looks up like after you actually submit the FAFSA. It should say, congratulations, your FAFSA has been successfully submitted, along with some other information. Make sure that this pops up along with receiving the confirmation email to make sure that it goes out to the schools. Okay, so there are many different types of federal financial aid that a student could qualify for. The 2 top ones are going to be considered gift aid. And the reason why is because each of these items is it's granted to the student, but it's not expected to be paid back. The first of those is federal Pell Grant. This is something that a student automatically is going to be reviewed for when they do their FAFSA. And if they're awarded this, they are awarded based on their eligibility, and then they're given the funds based on the number of credits that they're actually registered for at their school. Underneath that is a federal SEOG grant. This is technically a federal grant, but what they will do is they will actually give these funds out to individual schools and allow those schools to disperse the funds out to eligible students. Usually, this is going to be done on an automatic basis. Students will automatically be applied these funds if they qualify. It's usually not anything they would have to apply for or have to request or anything like that, but it will depend on the school's availability of these funds, because some schools might have less, some might have more, some of them might not have any availability in these funds at all. So if this is something that you are interested in or that you hear about at your school, definitely check with their financial aid office. The three remaining elements are going to be considered non-gift aid because you will have to typically request them, and in some instances, you will have to pay them back. The first one there is going to be federal work study. These funds don't have to be paid back, but they do have to be requested because they're actually applying to a little bit of a different situation. So if a student wants to do federal work study, they would actually work in a position on campus or with that college as a regular student employee. But instead of being paid out of a departmental budget, they're actually going to be paid out of a federal government budget. So this is something that will have to be requested because the student would have to do the application process for the position. They would have to get the process going so that way they can access the funds that the school has been given and put that through. Now, this is also going to depend on schools' availability because not every school is going to be cleared to actually do federal work study and to actually have a federal work study budget. So if this is something that you see on your awards notifications, definitely check in with your school. If it's something you think you might be interested in, they'll go ahead and get you started as far as eligible jobs and everything like that. Underneath that are going to be direct, subsidized, and unsubsidized federal student loans. Now, basically, usually every student who fills out the FAFSA is going to be awarded with at least some type of loan eligibility. And the amount that a student would qualify for depends on that eligibility, but it's also going to depend on where they're at in their schooling. So in a lot of cases, a freshman student might be eligible for a different amount than a senior. It is going to vary. Now, how they actually determine dispersing out loans is going to vary depending on the school. So regardless of whether you're planning to take loans out or not, I would highly suggest checking with your financial aid office as to what their process is for dispersing out funds, because some schools, they will let you know that you're eligible to take loans and they'll let you know how much you're eligible to take, but they're not going to do anything with that eligibility unless you specifically request it from them. However, additional schools are going to automatically apply loan funds to a student's bill unless they tell them otherwise. So definitely check in with them because you don't want to receive not expecting and then have to pay them back. What makes these loans different than a typical personal loan is that a student would have to be enrolled at least half time to receive them, which is in 6 eligible credits. But as long as they continue to be enrolled in at least 6 credits, any amount of a federal student loan is going to be deferred as far as payments until the student is out of 6 credits for more than 6 months. So it's typically after they graduate. Now, the difference is, and why they break them up between subsidized and unsubsidized, is subsidized amounts, while deferring those payments, it's also not going to accrue interest while the student is in school. It doesn't start accruing interest until after that 6-month period has passed. On the other hand, unsubsidized student loans are going to start accruing interest immediately once you take them out and once they're actually dispersed out to the student. Now, because loan funds are going to be deferred until after that 6-month period, that will include the interest that accrues on the unsubsidized loan. But what we usually suggest to students, if they have the ability to do so while they're in school, if they're taking out any kind of an unsubsidized loan, at least do the interest payments, make those interest payments every month, because if they don't, all of those interest payments will add up and add on to the end amount, but they will also charge interest on top of that interest when you go in for repayment. So if the student can take care of those interest payments while they're in school, it's going to save them a lot of money when they actually enter repayment. The last option there at the bottom is going to be a direct Parent Plus loan. This is basically available to parents if they want to supplement their students' financial aid eligibility. And how they determine how much a parent might qualify for is they're going to take the school's cost of attendance, minus out all other financial aid that the student has already received. Now, because the cost of attendance is going to be higher at four-year institutions, this is going to be a lot more common at four-year institutions. So if this is something that you might be interested in, check in with that financial aid office as far as the application process. Okay, so third element is going to be state aid. So each state has its own higher education commission, and each higher education commission has its own set of need-based programs and legislative programs that are available to students who are taking classes within that state. In order to actually apply for these programs, or most of these programs, a student would actually be able to do that by filling out the FAFSA for federal aid as well. As long as they do it by that state's deadline, which might vary by state, but most of them are going to be March 1st. As long as they fill out that FAFSA by March 1st and they're designating a school from that state, it's going to be sent over to that state's higher education commission. They're automatically going to be reviewed specifically for their need-based programs and other options for students. Now, within the state of Maryland, of course, it is going to be the Maryland Higher Education Commission, or MHEC, as it's often referred to. And as long as students fill out that FAFSA by that March 1st deadline, go ahead and submit it, and they put a Maryland school on that FAFSA, it's automatically going to be sent over to the Maryland Higher Education Commission. They're automatically going to review them for all of their need-based programs. And there are a number of things under that program that a student could qualify for. There are various types of grants, educational assistance grants, things like that. There is available part-time grants, but like the federal SEOG grant, these funds are actually given out to the individual schools, and then they're granted the funds to actually disperse out to eligible students who are considered part-time, which is typically going to be anything from 11 to 6 credits. And there is also the option of the Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship through the state of Maryland. Now, this is something I'll go into a little bit more detail because it is a fairly new program, but it's something that will apply to any community college within the state of Maryland. It is often referred to as free community college, and it is definitely a good program for those who qualify for it, but there are going to be stipulations and criteria that a student has to meet in order for these funds to work out. So it's definitely important for them to know what those criteria are and make sure that they can meet them. In addition to the need-based programs, we do have legislative programs, and those are typically going to be our senatorial and our delegate scholarships. And how students actually apply to these depends on who their senator and their delegate are. Each one is going to have their own application process. So the student, if they're interested in these scholarships, they would want to check out that website right there at the bottom, mhec.state.md.us. Check who their senator and their delegates are and contact them directly for their application process. They'll go ahead, they'll review the applications, and they will let the student know if they qualify for anything. With any kind of state award, if a student qualifies, they are going to reach out to them via email using the email that they actually put on the FAFSA application. And a lot of times they will contact students saying that they're eligible. They might need to go onto their website and actually accept the award. And they might need additional documentation to determine their eligibility. But they will often put a time limit. So if a student meets that deadline, I would have them just double check their emails every once in a while, because If they miss the deadline placed on the award and going on and accepting the award, they will no longer be eligible for that award. So definitely make sure that they're paying attention to their emails as far as getting anything from the state, because they definitely don't want to miss out on what they might qualify for. Okay, so a little bit more information about the Maryland Community College Promise Scholarship. It is considered a last dollar scholarship. So students will have to exhaust all other options of their non-gift aid. So basically they don't have to take out loans to be eligible for this scholarship. It is awarded either $5,000 per recipient for the full academic year, or they will use it as essentially a gap filler. So if a student qualifies for $1,000 in financial aid, but their total bill at a community college is $2,000. If they qualify for this Promise Scholarship, they will give them that remaining $1,000 to pay off the rest of the bill. Now, this, like I said, is going to apply to any community college within the state of Maryland, but a couple important things to note. If a student fails to either graduate from a community college with a certificate or an associate's degree, or they fail to actually complete 45 credits prior to transferring on to a four-year institution, and they receive these Promise Scholarship funds, if they don't meet either one of those criteria, anything that the student has gotten from the Promise Scholarship will convert to a loan, and that will have to be paid back to the state. So if a student is interested in this, they're contacted about their eligibility, make sure that they know about these criteria and they can meet it, so that way they don't have to pay any of these funds back to the state if they don't. If a student is awarded, they must be enrolled full-time each semester, which is in at least 12 credits, or they would need to be enrolled if they are deciding to go for a non-credited course program, which a lot of times will be related to trades and things like that. Some of those programs are going to be eligible for these funds, but they would need to be registered in the next class sequence as designated by that program. And in credited programs, they would also have to maintain a 2.5 GPA. If they fall out of contention with either one of these, it will impact their eligibility for that semester, but it very well might impact their eligibility overall, depending on what the impact is. Okay. As far as applying for the Promise Scholarship, main thing, you'd want to go ahead and apply for that FAFSA before that March 1st deadline. And if the Maryland Higher Education Commission reaches out to the student, letting them know that they might qualify, but they need additional documentation, make sure they look at that. At the bottom are some of the general eligibility criteria as far as adjusted household income. The student will have to be a high school graduate or a GED holder. They will have to maintain either a high school GPA of 2.3 or a previous community college GPA of a 2.5. And they do have to be enrolled in an eligible degree program, certificate program, or non-credited certificate program. I would say if a student is interested in this or any of the other state programs, default to the Maryland Higher Education Commission website, because they're going to post updates and information on that website before they let the individual schools know that any change has been made. So for the most up-to-date information, definitely defer to their website. Now, sometimes for whatever reason, a student is not eligible to actually fill out the FAFSA and apply for any kind of federal financial aid. And if this occurs, they can still qualify for aid through the state. And the way that they would do that is they would fill out the Maryland State Financial Aid Application, or the MISFA, as is often referred to. As long as they fill out this MISFA before that March 1st deadline for the state, they're automatically going to be reviewed for all of our need-based programs, including the Promise Scholarship, grants, everything like that. So this is definitely a very good option for students that might not be eligible to fill out that FAFSA. Now, sometimes students might have a question as to whether or not they're actually eligible to do the FAFSA, or would they need to go the route of the MISFA. That's totally fine. If a student is questioning that, they can definitely go ahead and go to the MISFA application. among the first questions, it is going to ask some identifying information to determine if a student would be qualified to do the FAFSA itself. If it does, then it's going to direct you over to that FAFSA. That's totally fine. Okay. So the last element is going to be scholarships. Now, there are going to be two main types of scholarships. The first one is institutional. These are scholarships that are specific to individual colleges and will only be dispersed out to students who are actually enrolled at that particular college. Now, the process of actually applying and the requirements and everything like that are going to vary pretty greatly depending on the individual college and what their criteria are. Some colleges like AACC, we have one general application that a student fills out. It's automatically going to put them under consideration for all of our AACC institutional scholarships. On the other hand, some other colleges will have individual scholarships that have individual applications that the student will award. It varies. And of course, the second option is going to be private scholarships. These are scholarship funds that are coming from any kind of entity outside of a school. A lot of times, high schools might have scholarships available to their students, church groups, volunteer groups, athletic teams, things like that, that students can apply for. And of course, there are many, many other options available out there to students. There are many different options for searches as far as free searches and things like that. There is an option there on the screen, studentaid.gov/scholarships. That is a free search through the federal government. Definitely search through those. There are many searches, like I said, online. Another very good resource is going to be your high school counselors. They're often very knowledgeable on different awards and things like that that are available to students. I would say general rule as far as applying for scholarships, you shouldn't ever be asked for any kind of a payment to submit an application. If you come across a scholarship application and it's asking you for any kind of a payment to submit an application, I would look very closely at it, but in all honesty, I would not apply for it because it very well might not be a legitimate scholarship. And in that instance, students will apply for a scholarship, but they'll never be reviewed for any funds, and they often can't get the funds that they paid back to actually apply for that scholarship. So if they're asking for any payments, I would highly suggest not applying for that scholarship. And also in the realm of scholarships, I would say apply for anything and everything that you think you might qualify for, because in the end of it, you don't really know what you're going to qualify for, and you don't know what's out there because might be an award out there for students that you didn't know about, and then you can definitely qualify for it because some other students might not know about it as well. Okay, so like I said at the beginning, I am a financial aid representative from AACC, but we can answer any questions applying to anything with financial aid within the realm of general financial aid. So if you think of any questions past tonight or anything like that, definitely give us a call or contact us. Our phone number is right there at the top. We do have access to our phone systems in a remote environment, so definitely feel free to give us a call, or you can send us an email to our general financial aid inbox as well. Or if you would like to contact me directly, that's wonderful as well. My information is down there at the bottom. Feel free to send me an email. With any kind of financial aid, if you have a question, please ask us. We here honestly to help in any way that we can. I work in the financial aid office, and I will be the first one to tell you that the financial aid process is a lot. It's involved, it's intense at times, especially if you've never done it before. And it can be very intimidating and very overwhelming. So if you're having problems, if you have a question, please, please, please reach out to us. We are always happy to answer any questions that you have or anything like that. There are no silly questions. We don't care if you ask us the same question 5 times. That's totally fine. We just want to make sure that you get everything that you are eligible for to help with your college education. So definitely reach out to us with any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Booker. Yeah, your office is amazing. I'll share a little story with you guys. When I went to Anne Arundel Community College and then I transferred to Towson, and I had a lot of questions. I was going to have to take out student loans for the first time. So I went to the financial aid office at Towson, and they said, "You're a transfer student. We're not seeing transfer students right now. We're only seeing incoming freshmen. So we can't talk to you right now." And I was freaking out because I didn't know what these documents meant. My parents didn't go to college. They didn't know what it meant. So I went back to your office at AACC and I said, "Can somebody help me understand what this means and what I'm supposed to do?" And you guys were so awesome. You helped me make the right decision.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I'm glad. I know it's definitely it's a process sometimes, especially when you've never done it before. It's just there's so many things involved with it. So
Yes, there is. Um, so thank you so much for taking the time to present this. And honestly, I don't know why we never recorded it before, because we're going to be able to archive this and have it on our website. So although we only had a couple friends with us tonight, I assure you this information will reach many more.
good.